Dear friends, do you believe in the consequences of sin or the justice of God? David was forgiven, but his sins followed him. Tamar was raped by Amnon, and Amnon in return was murdered by Absalom, his own brother. Join me as we look at David's house and the sorrows within. Dear friends, thank you for joining us again, and it is such a blessing to have you. We have been all along looking at the life of David, the man after God's own heart, and so that he too can be stained by sin. Nathan confronted David with his awful sins, the adultery with Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah, her husband. What David did displeased the Lord, and God was not going to pardon David because Uriah was a foreigner. As Nathan narrated the story, David senses right and wrongs straight away, but his problem was in not recognizing the culprit, who was himself. Nathan told David, because he did this grievous evil, his family will from now on live with the sword. David, on hearing this, repented, and God spares his life, but God decreed that his first son die. Then we have the birth of Solomon, whose name, Jedidiah, came through Nathan, meaning beloved of the Lord. Leaving our background at that, we shall jump into other crimes, this time by David's sons, Amnon and Absalom.
If you're going to indulge in sin, you will have to suffer the consequences. The Lord gives it to us pretty straight in Galatians chapter 6, verse 7. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. You are not going to get by with your sin. Galatians chapter 6, verse 8 goes on to say, the one who sows to please his sinful nature, from that nature will reap destruction. The one who sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. There is no question that David had sown to the flesh. Don't think for 1 minute that now he can walk away from his sin. Make a sweet little confession, and that is it. I've heard people say, well, the blood of Christ covers it. Well, it certainly does, and you don't lose your salvation. But let's accept the fact that sin causes a festering sore. This brings us to chapter 13. David has made his confession of sin. God has told him, your sin has caused my enemies to blaspheme. I won't give you up, but you are not going to get by with it. Thank God that he will not give us up. Let's turn to 2 Samuel chapter 13 and read verse 1. In the course of time, Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David. Although Absalom and Tamar had the same father and mother, Tamar was Amnon's half-sister. David was their father, but they had different mothers. Verses 2 to 4. Amnon became frustrated to the point of illness on account of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. Now Amnon had a friend named Jonadab, son of Shimeah, David's brother. Jonadab was a very shrewd man. He asked Amnon, why do you, the king's son, look so haggard morning after morning? Won't you tell me? Amnon said to him, I am in love with Tamar, my brother, Absalom's sister. Amnon was not eating. He was so madly in love with Tamar that he had lost his appetite. His friend could see that he was not eating. Actually, that would have been his cousin. But he also recognized the problem, since Tamar was Absalom's sister, and Amnon was afraid of Absalom. Verses 5 to 7. go to bed and pretend to be ill, Jonadab said. When your father comes to see you, say to him, I would like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food in my sight, so I may watch her and then eat it from her hand. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. When the king came to see him, Amnon said to him, I would like my sister Tamar to come and make some special bread in my sight, so I may eat from her hand. David sent word to Tamar at the palace, Go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him. There is no use to read the next few verses which contain the details of what happened. Amnon defiled Tamar. Then we are told that he hated her. Verse 13, What about me? Where could I get rid of my disgrace? And what about you? You would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. Please speak to the king. He will not keep me from being married to you. This is Tamar's desperate cry. This awful thing had taken place within the walls of David's house. When Amnon was finished, he flung her out. Verse 19, Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the ornamented robe she was wearing. She put her hand on her head and went away, weeping aloud as she went. Tamar was thrown out of the house, and now she is in sackcloth and ashes. Verse 20, her brother Absalom said to her, Has that Amnon, your brother, been with you? Be quiet now, my sister, he is your brother. Don't take this thing to heart. And Tamar lived in her brother Absalom's house, a desolate woman. When King David heard all this, he was furious. David is angry about what happened, but you don't hear about anything later on. You don't get to hear of how he dealt with the matter. David was like many other men in Scripture, very indulgent, a father who was indulgent, who raised a bunch of kids who were pretty bad. That has happened again and again. It started with old Eli, God's high priest. His sons were not only immoral, they were godless and had a racket going on. Then we come to Samuel. Since he was raised in the same atmosphere as Eli's sons, you would think Samuel would be more careful, more of a disciplinarian, that he would have maintained some authority and control over his sons. But his sons turned out to be corrupt and dishonest. Next, we come to David. He knew Samuel, and he knew Samuel's sons. You would think he would have been more strict with his children, but he wasn't. He too was an indulgent father. He was angry about what Amnon did to his sister Tamar, but that's about it. Then you think of David. What kind of an example was David? He hadn't set an example for his sons. The main problem today in our homes is the lack of example and discipline on the part of the parents. My friend, lecturing will not get you anywhere. Give him an example and discipline. Remember, actions speak louder than words. Another strike against David is the fact that he had multiple wives and many children. As a king with many heavy responsibilities, how much time do you think he would have had in spending time in rearing his children? The problem with many of us is that we probably have neglected our families for the sake of work. And even if it's the Lord's work, well, dear friend, let's recognize that the Lord's work begins at home. The Lord's work starts within the confines of our own family. We should never underestimate the responsibilities we have within our own home. Parents need to realize that they need to spend time training their children. Spend time, yes. Invest time. Don't get the impression that you're raising little angels. Proverbs chapter 23, verses 13 to 14. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you punish him with the rod, he will not die. Punish him with the rod and save his soul from death. David did nothing about the problem created by Amnon. So what happened? David's silence simmered in Absalom's hatred toward Amnon. He took law into his own hands later on. Parents, don't be afraid to say no. Don't fear to show your disapproval over a certain course your child is taking. They may whine and whimper, grumble and rebel, but their respect for you will be established when they mature and come to their senses. The moment you keep silent, you will be igniting a series of problems and unnecessary troubles. Chapter 13, verse 22. Absalom never said a word to Amnon, either good or bad. He hated Amnon because he had disgraced his sister Tamar. This is David's home, friends. There is strife. There is anger. This is David's life at home. He did not get by with his sin. God says that we will not get by with sin either. It only multiplies. Absalom is marking time. He is waiting for the day when he can get even with Amnon, and that day will come. I'm not going into detail at this point, but the day came when Absalom killed Amnon. Absalom had waited for 2 years to make his move. He invited the king's sons to a feast in connection with sheep shearing time. Since Absalom had shown no signs of wanting revenge, David let Amnon go and attend the gathering. Verse 28, Absalom ordered his men, "Listen, when Amnon is in high spirits from drinking wine, and I say to you, strike Amnon down, then kill him. Don't be afraid. Have not I given you this order? Be strong and brave." When the day came that Amnon's heart was merry with wine, Absalom had him killed. The message David received was that all his sons were dead. Then Jonathan told him that only Amnon was slain. My lord the king should not be concerned about the report that all the king's sons are dead. Only Amnon is dead. Verse 34. Meanwhile Absalom had fled. Now the man standing watch looked up and saw many people on the road west of him coming down the side of the hill. The watchman went and told the king, "I see men in the direction of Horonaim on the side of the hill." Jonadab said to the king, "See, the king's sons are here. It has happened just as your servant said." Since Absalom actually plotted Amnon's murder, he has to flee. Verses 36 and 37. As he finished speaking, the king's son came in wailing loudly. The king too and all his servants wept very bitterly. Absalom fled and went to Talmai, son of Ammihud, the king of Geshur. But King David mourned for his son every day. Absalom's mother was a daughter of the king of Geshur, and this is one reason why Absalom fled to him. As I have pointed out before, David made a mistake in marrying this foreign lady. Remember that he had married this woman during his lapse of faith when he withdrew from the land. She bore the king 2 very attractive children. One was Absalom and the other was Tamar. Apparently David did not discipline this wild boy. In a way, Absalom seems to be justified in what he did. Since David did not take matters and settle the issue, he took it into his own hands when Amnon sinned and got him killed. Verses 38 and 39. After Absalom fled and went to Geshur, he stayed there 3 years. And the spirit of the king longed to go to Absalom, for he was consoled concerning Amnon's death. After Absalom took Amnon's life, he fled. David wanted to bring him back, but he did not. David mourned for him, and that is all he did. He mourned for him and wished for his return. Absalom, I believe, was more like David than any of his other sons. I guess it was probably David's intention that Absalom succeed him as the next king of Israel. That ambition also lurked in the mind of Absalom, as we shall see. Chapter 14, verses 1 to 3. Joab, son of Zeruiah, knew that the king's heart longed for Absalom. So Joab sent someone to Tekoa and had a wise woman brought from there. He said to her, "Pretend you are in mourning, dress in mourning clothes, and don't use any cosmetic lotions. Act like a woman who has spent many days grieving for the dead. Then go to the king and speak these words to him." And Joab put the words in her mouth. Joab grew up in the vicinity of Tekoa and may have known this woman from earlier days. Verse 4 to 7. When the woman from Tekoa went to the king, she fell with her face to the ground to pay him honor, and she said, "Help me, O king." The king asked her, "What is troubling you?" She said, "I am indeed a widow. My husband is dead. I, your servant, had 2 sons. They got into a fight with each other in the field, and no one was there to separate them. One struck the other and killed him. Now the whole clan has risen up against your servant. They say, 'Hand over the one who struck his brother down, so that we may put him to death for the life of his brother whom he killed. Then we will get rid of the heir as well.' They would put out the only burning coal I have left, leaving my husband neither name nor descendant on the face of the earth." Joab got her to play upon the feelings of David by telling him her sad story. Just as David had used deception, he was now being deceived. Verse 11. She said, "Then let the king invoke the Lord his God to prevent the avenger of blood from adding to the destruction, so that my son will not be destroyed. As surely as the Lord lives," he said, "not one hair of your son's head will fall to the ground." David grants her imaginary son a full pardon. Then she makes the application to David and Absalom. The woman said, "Why then have you devised a thing like this against the people of God?" When the king says this, does he not convict himself? For the king has not brought back his banished son. The widow of Tekoa was putting David in the place of her imaginary prosecutors. What her prosecutors could do to her remaining son, David was doing to God's people by punishing Absalom for the crime he had committed. She is representing the people of Israel as the widowed mother. She claims to be speaking in the name of all Israel, and possibly she does express their feelings. Absalom was very popular with the people, and they probably felt that Amnon got what he deserved. He deserved to die for the crime that he committed. The final outcome of the incident is that in a half-hearted way, David is willing for Absalom to return. Verses 21 to 24. The king said to Joab, "Very well, I will do it. Go, bring back the young man Absalom." Joab fell with his face to the ground to pay him honor, and he blessed the king. Joab said, "Today your servant knows that he has found favor in your eyes, my lord the king, because the king has granted his servant's request." Then Joab went to Geshur and brought Absalom back to Jerusalem. But the king said, "He must go to his own house. He must not see my face." So Absalom went to his own house and did not see the face of the king. It is unfortunate that David did not want to see his son. It actually set the stage for Absalom's rebellion, which takes place in chapter 15. Let's read verses 32 through 33. Absalom said to Joab, "Look, I sent word to you and said, 'Come here, so I can send you to the king to ask, why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me if I were still there, and now I want to see the king's face, and if I am guilty of anything, let him put me to death." So Joab went to the king and told him this. Then the king summoned Absalom, and he came in and bowed down with his face to the ground before the king. And the king kissed Absalom. Although David's kiss was a sign of complete reconciliation and restoration of Absalom's position as the king's son, I guess it was given a little reluctantly and a little too late. The fact that his father did not give him instant, wholehearted forgiveness actually paved the way for a lot of rebellion and confusion later on. Remember, God had not forgiven David half-heartedly. God did not say, "Well, I forgive you, but we will not have fellowship anymore. I will not restore to you the joy of your salvation." When God forgives, He forgives completely. You and I are admonished. Be kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven you. Has God forgiven us? Yes, of course. Then we are to forgive one another. The same way that God had forgiven David, He should have forgiven Absalom. But He doesn't do that. He is setting the stage for rebellion. Oh, my friend, our God is a God who forgives. Now let's read Galatians chapter 6, verse 1. "Brothers, if someone is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should restore him gently, but watch yourself, or you also may be tempted." God forgives, but He also restores very gently. And that's the way we've got to restore someone who is caught in sin, gently. David made a blunder in not forgiving his son or dealing with him gently. Whereas God had given forgiveness and granted forgiveness to David and had dealt with him gently. But David doesn't do that. He will live to regret it. My dear friend, do you display the Father's heart, a heart of love and forgiveness? Or do you choose to forget the manner in which God has forgiven you and you show a very judgmental attitude? The home or the fellowships where we attend should be places where relationships can be restored, a place where people can find acceptance, love, and forgiveness. Well, it's not a place to be judgmental and to display a holier-than-thou attitude. Dear friend, let's never forget the grace each one of us have experienced. Let us spread the love of Christ.
Dear friends, the consequences of unforgiveness are many, both from the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. There are many who carry the burden of unforgiveness towards oneself or others. In reality, the person who hurt us have forgotten all about it, but can keep imprisoning the victim for a long unwanted time. And healing can only come from God. As imperfect humans, we also hurt people, knowingly or unknowingly, and need forgiveness. Therefore, forgiveness is a bridge we all walk on, at least occasionally. Dear friends, because God forgives, we are called to forgive. It is difficult, but it is divine. It not only releases the forgiven, but the forgiver too. And it is the only way forward for reconciliation, healing, and growth. Do you have anyone you have held grudges against and it keeps bothering you? Or do you need forgiveness from anyone and you have not said sorry? Ask God to help you today. Receive and release healing right away. God bless you.